just when I thought the NBA season was over, Dallas pulled us back in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 97th episode of the longest tenured Denver Nuggets spin-off podcast in the world. Welcome to the DNVR Nuggets' Serbian Corner. My name is Miroslav, and I finally have some news to comment on. And before that, please let me remind you to like and subscribe, and also do all those wonderful content spreading things people do. If you want to support the show directly, please consider becoming a supporter on patreon.com/MiroslavCuk. The NBA Finals are still ongoing since the Mavericks finally won a game, and boy, did they win a game. Luka Doncic blew the Celtics' doors and never looked back. The biggest lead was 48 points, and I don't know who is this good for. A bunch of sweeps and 5-game series, topped by so many 40-plus point leads throughout the playoffs. Adam Silver may have brought the most money to the league ever, but if this is the parody he was trying to create, I don't know how many basketball purists enjoy it. This season was pretty dumb so far, but more on that in a couple of minutes. More non-Nuggets related news. It is about a big Nugget, though. Nikola Jokic is among 16 guys who will compete for the final 12 spots on the Serbian National Team for the Paris Olympic Games. This is the entire squad. It is, per usual, a very pure center-heavy list with 5 guys that cannot play any other spot on the court. So I hope that injuries that often occur during or just before the training camp do not dictate having more than 3 of these guys on the final squad. Ideally, it would be Jokic, our second-best center, Milutinov, and then Petrushev, who is our switch-all center they would need against a team like Germany or, God forbid, Italy. At the 4, I want to see Nikola Jovic and our most experienced player, Vladimir Lucic, since I'm not sure Pokuševski is a real player. At the 3, it's Lucic again, then our defensive specialist Dobric, and then sharpshooter Vanja Marinkovic as a third option. At the 2, Bogdan Bogdanovic, of course, backed up by Guduric, who is among the best EuroLeague 2 guards. Finally, at the point guard, which many think is our weakest position, we have Vasa Micic, who will have a chance to demonstrate what his 2-man game with Jokic will look like after a year in the NBA. We also have our defensive demon in Aleksa Avramovic, and then Harrison's favorite player, Yaramaz. All in all, these are all the Serbian star players outside of Kalinic, Stefan Jovic, and Miloš Teodosic, who all retired from playing for the national team. You never know what the future holds, but this might be the best chance for Nikola Jokic's career to compete for the Olympic gold, even with Team USA bringing all of their elders to the tournament. Anyway, 2 weeks of the Olympic basketball tournament will be a good distraction during the NBA offseason, even for those Nuggets fans who won't be watching the games maniacally with the hope of their first Olympic gold since 1980 and first gold medal of any kind in 22 years. All right, enough about that. I'll update you on Team Serbia as the news rolls out. But in the meantime, it is time to focus back on the Nuggets. So I have a couple of very passionate and very smart Nuggets fans to talk to. I usually introduce my guests one by one, but when you have Will and Grace with you, you have to introduce them together. From the What's in the Game podcast on YouTube and podcast apps, it's Will Jones and Grace Jean. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us, Miroslav. I can't wait to talk some more Nuggets. We've been covering the playoffs, and unfortunately, the Nuggets didn't go as far as we wanted. So I'm excited to jump back into that before we talk about it on our show.
For sure. This is like the best. Oh, I was just going to say this is the best mood I've seen Will in a while.
Nuggets time.
Oh, don't worry. I'm going to bum me out very soon with my questions. So don't worry about that. So you guys are, in my humble opinion, the brightest new stars in the Nuggets media universe since you started your podcast just 2 months ago. So please tell me a bit about your background as fans and content creators, even though Will spoke about it a bit last time he was on this show.
Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
I was going to say, Will, you should go first because you're more concise, and then I can elaborate.
Okay, well,
Fair.
I'm from Denver, so I've been Nuggets fan, basketball fan a long time. I've been more active, this year on Twitter. I think this is the year where I really tried to actually make some content, put out some videos and breakdowns, and join some podcasts. And so I just been talking to Grace and tons of people on Twitter. It's a great community of Nuggets fans, and I finally convinced Grace after multiple comments of throwing it out there and just whittled her down, and she relented and did a podcast with me.
Grace?
Yeah, no, I'm a Nuggets fandom transplant. I joined the bandwagon last year during the playoff run before I knew how good they actually were, though, to be clear, actually. But yeah, I got really into following the team during the playoff run, and then it kind of sparked my interest in kind of diving deeper into the NBA as a whole last off season. And then eventually I was tired of just lurking on Twitter, so I started hopping into the discussions. And so some of you might know me as the Chaos Elmo as my profile picture on Twitter, but yeah, I live tweet games and stuff, and Will approached me about doing a podcast, and I was like, I don't know about that. But then he was like, but I could do like a lot of the work. And then I was like, okay, let's go. And so, yeah, now we do the show, and it's been really fun, actually. And it's been sort of like a roller coaster of emotions with the starting the podcast and then the Nuggets playoff run and then it ending. But I'm actually really excited to dive into some of our off-season content once the NBA Finals eventually come to their conclusion.
So I've heard your story about you liking the Thunder last year, and you hated the Timberwolves because they eliminated the Thunder. So by extension, you liked the Nuggets because they eliminated the Timberwolves. Now, you say that you knew nothing about the Nuggets back then. So
Nothing.
are you like super? What's the word? Are you super modest about your knowledge on the Nuggets, or did you just go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds with your knowledge on the Nuggets in this past year?
So people that know me in my IRL life know that this is actually like very on brand for me to kind of hop onto something and then want to know as much about it as quickly as possible. And so, yeah, I did not know, like I kind of knew that the Nuggets as a team, as a franchise existed, but I didn't know who Nikola Jokic was before last year. Actually, I actually didn't. And part of what kept bringing me like back to the team, because I, like you mentioned, I did I'm like a great like poster child for, wow, fans coming into the NBA because of the play-in game, because I didn't really watch the Thunder that much either, but I saw them in like the 9-10 play-in game and I was like, oh, Shea's like really good. This is crazy. Then I saw them get beat down by the Timberwolves. And then I was like, you know what? I don't like the way that this team bludgeoned this like scrappy young Thunder team. So I hope they lose to whoever they play round one. And it was the Nuggets. And that's when I discovered like how awesome just everything about the current team construct was. But things like the kind of MVP drama and like Jamal's like coming back from the ACL story and just everything else about the team is what sort of kept that connection like stronger than just a, wow, I'm glad you beat this other team that I didn't like for like no reason in round one.
I'm trying to remember the name of the ESPN reporter who said that she didn't know what
it was. Lisa
MVP
Salters. I think she's an AP. Yeah.
So you were basically Lisa
Yeah.
Salters a year ago.
I was actually
Okay.
like, I hadn't seen any Nuggets games before.
Well, to be fair, they weren't a lot on TV in previous years. So you'll get a pardon there. So Will, what made you contact Grace and offer like your services for the podcast to start?
Yeah, Grace is a great follow on Twitter, and it was
Cheers.
almost like I didn't know that she was so new to the Nuggets. I always thought she just was a Nuggets fan because she just kind of like blended in with everybody on Twitter. And I was like, I don't even remember when I started kind of following her and talking to her, but I really always liked her commentary and posts, and I thought this would be cool to listen to on a podcast. Just say what you say on Twitter, and I think people would really want to listen to it. So, and I had been telling her to like do her own thing, and she was like, I don't want to do it alone. So then in my mind, I was like, maybe I could do it with her if she would want to do it with me. And thankfully she did. So we just kind of went for it and planned it out. We have like a similar interest in like literature and plays and like Shakespeare and stuff like that. So our name comes from a Shakespeare line from Romeo and Juliet, but it's switched over to basketball, which we'll lean more into that as we go along probably. But yeah, it's just been fun so far, and we're just kind of trying it out, seeing how it goes.
We have a lot of cheesy segments in the pipeline.
Cheesy segments are my favorite. So what are your plans for the podcast outside of cheesy segments? Like,
yeah,
what do you plan for this off season? Because I know what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna make a bunch of game shows in October,
that's gonna be awesome.
in August and September, because there's not much to do. But you probably have a better idea.
Yeah, we're gonna definitely focus on Nuggets off season previewing and draft, free agency, summer league. We're gonna cover the Olympics because Jokic is gonna be playing. Hopefully Jamal will be playing. And we'll do some other teams because we cover a lot of the NBA, but the Nuggets are our favorite team. We'll have some guests on for the first time. We didn't have any guests throughout this playoffs, but now that we're going into the offseason and doing Nuggets and different topics, we're going to try and get as many guests as possible. So we're excited to get some new people on.
Brilliant. Okay, this is a good point to make our first break. And then after that, we are gonna, I promise you guys, we're gonna talk about actual Nuggets. Don't go anywhere.
Okay.
We are back. So, Will, you felt really well coming into this show. Like you had really good. How do you call it? Never mind. I'm gonna mess up with you. So the Nuggets season was a disappointment. The team that was by far the best last season was surpassed by, in my opinion, 3 teams in these playoffs, and we can debate that if you want later. You can blame Malone for not playing anybody outside of the starters and Christian Brown in Game 7. You can blame Calvin Booth for not giving a lot of veteran options or even playable players to Malone. You can blame Jamal for not being healthy all season, which resulted in him being out of shape and then re-injured during the playoffs. You can blame Joker for missing all those threes in Game 7, or for obviously quitting every time he calculated his team was not good enough to compete in a game, which resulted in some ugly blowout losses. You can blame MPJ for missing open shots when the whole team was shook. I don't think you can blame Aaron Gordon or KCP for not having any production in Game 7 when the team emphasized the 2-man game completely. It's been 4 weeks since the team got eliminated. What is your perspective on it now, and what do you expect the team to do going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely touched on most of the areas where blame is to be given, but it's all related, like we know Jamal played bad. We know the starters lost their minutes heavily, which we kind of attribute to Malone overplaying them, which he admitted in the press conference after the season ended. So you can, be angry or upset at any single player or coach, but you can also understand how it's all related. I think the biggest thing that I learned after it was all said and done was just that the team they were viewing the season as if it was this slog, and I don't think they loved the title defense that was put forth in front of them. They kind of talked about having difficulty finding the motivation, and we saw throughout the regular season times where they put together a really good game, like against Boston and those tougher teams. But there were so many times where they were just playing to a standard that we weren't used to. Like, we knew they had so much more to give, but because of the roster and playing the new guys, it's so hard to develop young guys with, a championship level starting five. So we saw how difficult that was. We saw them being tired and injured. So I don't know how most fans feel. I feel more forgiving, I guess. It's definitely disappointing, but I still want to stick to the plan of keeping the starting five together, trying to develop young guys, and hopefully draft players that are almost Christian Brown-like, where we're getting some surprising contributions from them right away in this next season. I think we'll have that chip on our shoulder again to make another title run.
So, Grace, you haven't been with this team for as long as Will or I. You've only seen the great part of Nuggets history. I mean, from up close.
Mhm.
Are you as forgiving as Will?
I am. I actually think that Will pretty much summed up exactly how I feel about everything pretty well. I think that the fact that I didn't get to experience the sort of dark days of Nug life actually makes it easier for me to be optimistic about how the team can move forward, because I don't see them sliding, all the way back just because of this setback, especially because, like Will says, all of these different factors were connected to one another. But in terms of just the additive portion, they were so close to getting through what I think would have been their toughest series the entire run, even though all of these things had to go wrong. And so, to me, I can see it that way, and at the same time say every single member of the team, from the players through the coaching staff to the front office people, have something to look at the mirror about this summer and really improve going into next season. So,
You know what, guys? I think I've been pretty dark in the last month, and honestly, if you look at the body of work of last season, it was probably the third or fourth most successful Nugget season in its NBA history. Like, it's probably fourth, but you can nitpick over there. It was a 57-win season. Yeah, they got eliminated in the second round, but it was a game 7. On the other hand, it's fourth Nicolas MVP season, and we have only one finals to show for.
Yeah.
In those 4 seasons. So that's pretty frustrating to me. And yes, sure, even if they don't win anything until the end of this era, it's still going to be the most fun era of Nuggets basketball by far.
Absolutely.
But as long as it's going on, there's hope of greatness. I believe most fans feel that. So how do you weigh those two things? Like, these guys was actually really awesome, but on the other hand, we knew how much better it could have been.
It is funny what winning one title does to some fans and people around the Nuggets, where you have people who are just happy we won one, and they'll be losing won't affect them as much. But at the same time, Jokic is so good and so transcendent that I will be a little disappointed if we don't win multiple titles in his window, because he really can be that impactful on the court. So when it's all said and done, and we look back, if he only has one, I'll be happy for that one. But I know that we can do so much more. But overall, it was one of the better Nuggets seasons. It kind of relates to Jamal's season, where throughout the season, he was up and down, but a lot of his career like high numbers and averages were right there with some of his better seasons. It's just he couldn't like consistently stay on the court and keep that consistent level of play. And then it went way down in the playoffs, which I didn't expect, because I know he was injured with the calf, but yeah, you can forgive that, and I am forgiving of this season. But next season, I want to see a much better effort, and I want to see more wins, and I want to see a higher seed. Even like, I'm not saying push for the 1 seed and get injured again, but I want to be in the top 3, and then I want to contend again. And if it doesn't work out, then I'll probably be more harsh and looking to like make some more serious changes. But if we don't keep KCP, we may have to make some serious changes right away.
So Grace, before last season, Calvin Booth had that amazing PR work with Kevin O'Connor, just buy himself a year. Like, I'm not gonna do anything this year, and you're all gonna think I'm a genius because like I'm preserving the team for what's coming up next season. But if you don't get anything from next season, as Will just said, then you're absolutely on the hot seat with you. Would you agree with me that Calvin Booth really botched last season? Yes, you can say that the idea is because of the new CBA, you need to be really careful with what you do with your roster construction. But on the other hand, you are in the middle of the prime of one of the greatest players of all time, and you didn't even try to replace Bruce Brown from last season.
So there are a couple of layers there. I think I have like 3 specific things that I think were my main critiques of what Calvin like either did or didn't do last season. But before I get to those, the trying to replace Bruce Brown thing is really tough because Bruce was, although in my opinion, as much as I love him, I don't think he's a $22.5 million a year player. He is definitely more valuable over the course of a season than the, what was it, 6.5, whatever he was getting on the taxpayer MLE from us last year. And that's true, I think, whether it's on this team or another team, but especially on this team, like he provided well above that value last year. We were not going to be able to replace him on that kind of deal. And I think one of the moves that I, in retrospect, don't criticize about Calvin Booth, but was, a questionable decision last year that's related, and I think a lot of other fans think so too, was giving the taxpayer MLE to Reggie. And the reason I, in retrospect, don't criticize that move is because of how that specific need of the ball handling aspect and relative like point guard, scoring guard, whatever play is and was very expensive as it turned out last season, and is going to continue to be, because having those skills in a player just comes at a premium in the NBA. Who knew? Value skill is expensive, right? But the 3 things that I will continue to criticize Calvin for doing last year were giving standard deals to both Jalen Pickett and Hunter Tyson. Could have been one or the other. I don't care. Even if that person didn't play, because if one of them was on a 2-way, we would have had a roster spot that could have gone to someone on the buyout market or in some kind of like smaller trade, say at the deadline. But we didn't have roster spots because of that. And the one sort of way that people were talking about creating that around the deadline would have involved trading Vlatko, which I was like completely against, because it would have been so bad for the vibes, and particularly for Jokic, who I think had one of his tougher seasons just because of the load that he had to bear with Jamal out and the lack of on-ball creation that was not present in the other seasons where he was missing, one or both of Jamal or MPJ, right? The other move was, so I kind of grouped the Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson, both getting standard deals as one. The other move was giving Zeke the extension that he got, not necessarily extending him at all, because I think it's valuable to have a salary around that size just present on the roster. However, the fact that it's now a 4-year deal, including the player option, makes it harder to move because it is automatically a negative value contract, almost irrespective of what Zeke could have done this year, because he would have had to reach like his 80th percentile outcome as a player to be worth a 4-year deal on that contract, in my opinion. But he isn't that. He isn't close to that, and he didn't demonstrate that last year in what was his 4th year in the NBA. He's entering his 5th year, and he's barely playable. On this team, maybe it would work out more on another team, but there's no like really high level skill to sort of sell and swindle another GM on. And so that extra year is something I'm highly critical of, just because if it was just 3, we could get away with a salary dump, in my opinion. But that combined with the season that Zeke had, given that he had not demonstrated consistently the ability to get to that level as a player, I think was a mistake. I don't think that he would have fetched a ton in restricted free agency or something like that. And he could have been another like just piece that we move at the deadline if the extension hadn't happened at all. But again, I don't disagree with the extension. It's just the construction of it. And so like, I do think that it's a question with Cal. Like he, to some degree, has been able to identify some really great players for us, whether it was Bruce in free agency last year or Christian and Peyton in the draft. But there are other aspects to being a general manager, like trying to get great value contracts across the roster, which is very important, especially in this new CBA, or having relationships with other front offices so that you can kind of get these like small marginal advantages in these different deals that may make a difference down the line, especially with the way that the cap rules are currently structured. And from what we've seen so far from him, that side of things is at best a question mark, and at worst, like he might just be really bad at this side of things, like the sort of cold, calculated side of being a GM that involves being as efficient as possible in that resource allocation.
You laid it out perfectly. All the good moves Cal made, most of them were done in year 1. Year 1 was actually perfect. Like you cannot find a move he made in year 1 that wasn't a great one. In the second season, I also agree Reggie Jackson deal was actually pretty good, especially considering that he almost had as many minutes as Jamal Murray last season playing the point guard, which is, of course, not ideal, but he really helped the Nuggets get to those 57 wins. But then last season's draft, and I'm talking about this because another draft is coming up in like 12 days. He drafted 3 guys last year in the middle of Nikola Jokic's prime. And I was really hoping for them to, trade the draft pick to get somebody, like attach it to Zeke, whoever, like try to get a guy that's at least slightly better than what Zeke was even then, or whatever, like whoever they did. So, Will, would you be surprised? I mean, would you be mad if Cal would just draft another guy with a first-round pick? I don't care about the second-round pick, but the first-round pick this time around, if he's not like trading away 1 or 2 of the draft picks from last year.
I wouldn't be mad if you picked someone with a first round. I think there are some good prospects, like especially at backup center, that we can get that I feel pretty excited about. Because we really need that. We need somebody, even if it's not like a traditional type of center, we're like a rim protecting type big. I just want to like find someone who can play, save Aaron Gordon's body a little bit, save Jokic's body a little bit. Because I mean, really, we were only one guy like short, and I think And we can argue whether that was, I mean, I think we all agree it was kind of like we needed a ball handler type player, even though we had Reggie. He just like was not holding up on the defensive end. And the lineups with Reggie and Jamal, like we didn't know how to specifically navigate that, even in shorter rotation playoff.
We needed a starter level player, which we had the year before.
Yeah, exactly. So it's hard to replace, as we just covered, but I was like optimistic that even without Bruce we would go far, and we still almost beat the Wolves. But it's hard to know, because you can get like as many guys as you want, or trade, or bring in a vet, but if Jamal's injured in the playoffs, or any of our starters are still injured in the playoffs, you're still gonna have a tough time getting to the title. And that was Calvin's philosophy of not having redundancy, but we just didn't have enough redundancy in some skills in some spots to really cover some holes. So I just hope they're being honest and looking at it. I think it's fairly straightforward, determining what skills we need to bring. But it's also like coaching and play style. So I'm hoping that whatever Malone felt was the missing piece, Calvin also kind of agrees with that, and that they're at least on the same page with what they want to do.
Yeah, the reason I framed this question like this is because they already have all of those young guys, all of those unproven guys. And are you adding another one, like replacing Justin Holiday or DJ or Vlatko with another young guy? That's the only, I don't mind drafting a guy that could help. It's just that then you need to get rid of one of the projects or one of the guys that really wasn't developed last season at all.
Yeah, I definitely think, I expect we probably will be getting rid of someone. Like I think we're going to have to attach someone with Zeke right away. And I'm hoping that, and a future draft pick, or, something like that. And probably going to have to bring in more salary depending on who that can be. But I think they see how hard it is to have young guys, and getting at least, I mean, you just need to have the right vets with the right skill sets. Because relying on a younger guy to be like a ball handler is probably a bad idea, but you can get away with it in certain positions. So yeah, I'm expecting like a Hunter Tyson probably to not be on the team, something like that, probably be traded.
Grace, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I was talking to I think it was our favorite draft guy, Nuggets draft guy on Twitter, CT Fazio, about this, where he asked how many is too many young guys to have on the roster, and I kind of think we have too many right now. So I agree with Will that if we got another one, and we probably will, there would have to be some consolidation of that back end of the bench for sure. I think that the question about drafting 3 guys last year versus this year is interesting, because a lot of teams are accumulating these like second round picks, and like usually it's like future second round picks, to act as sort of lubrication for auxiliary deals, right? But last year, Cal went the way of drafting all of the guys that he got the picks for. And it was clear when he made that trade during the finals that he probably had particular players that he was targeting. But in this year's draft, compared to last year, it is less, the picks are less desirable, both first and second round. And it's one of the reasons that I don't think trading our back half of the first round pick in a draft that is seen as weaker than most drafts, especially compared to last year, is going to net us more than we could get with whoever they might be looking at to take with that first round pick. Potentially, right? I think the first round picks have been good, right? Because even we talked about the moves from last year mostly being pretty questionable, but in retrospect, we'll say, okay, the Reggie deal was fine. Also, taking Julian, like, until he got injured midway through the season, I just thought he looked good as a player, right? He wasn't shooting well most of the year, but every time he was on the floor, I was just like, I don't know, this guy seems like he can play. He seems like an NBA player. When you get a guy at the end of the first round or near the end, like we did last year, realizing that he's like, this just looks like a rotation guy is just a plus. And I really expect a bigger role for him next year. And we kind of need him to continue to grow in that. But I think last year we basically saw his floor, because again, he wasn't shooting well, but he still looked like a player on both ends of the floor, just seemed solid. Right. But again, the picks from last year were more valuable because it was a better draft and could have been like traded. Let's, leaving the first round pick out of it, even the second round picks, there were tons of, but you also could have taken like one of my greatest, like, man, I wish Cal had taken Trace Jackson Davis in the second round. Like you were talking about someone that could have been like a better version of Zeke. But outside of him, actually, the big depth in last year's draft is, I think, significantly worse than this year's draft. So at that particular position, I actually think this year is better than that. And there's a possibility that they end up using their first round pick on a big. History of that is questionable, not just for this franchise, but others as well. So you just never know. But it's kind of complicated is the answer. And so it's like, if they weren't taking Trace Jackson Davis with one of those second round picks, then what they did at least made sense at the time. But like the other thing I just wanted to touch on was how Will said you need to have the right vet with the right skill set with them. If Zeke was like a good, at least solid, let's say, fourth-year NBA player playing that backup center spot, even if he wasn't like ideal backup center like a Mo Wagner, I would love to be a Nugget. If he could do the things that would allow him to be a scaffold for these younger players that we had first and second year players, like being a good screener, if he were a better passer, if he were a better roller, it would just kind of give a framework for that second unit to operate, even though I disagree generally with the way Malone does these hockey rotations. But like Will said, when you're looking at particular positions like ball handler, but I think also center, so even if we take someone in the first round that could potentially be a Zeke replacement, I'd want a veteran in one of those spots, because if they know what they're doing, it helps everyone else be able to know their jobs and perform at that level too, right?
Yeah, so let's hope it's not Reggie Jackson in the veteran role as a ball handler. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if there's a serviceable big off the bench and you get like a healthy season from Jamal, yeah, it's tough. Okay, let's take one more short break, and then we'll talk about some teams that impressed me in these playoffs, probably more than the Nuggets. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back. So the Timberwolves won against the Nuggets in 7 games, but then got smacked by the Mavericks. I personally hate the rock, paper, scissors talk about the NBA matchups. I agree the team can jump on you using a specific advantage or your specific deficiency in a game or even 2. But in a 7-game series, a better team should just win. No excuses. So let's talk a bit about the team that scientifically proved was better than the Nuggets winning in a 7-game series. Did they do anything special comparing to last year when they lost in the first round without Jaden McDaniels and my guy Naz Reid, to be fair? Or were the Nuggets just a lot worse than last season? Let's start with Will.
I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, the Nuggets were less motivated and more banged up and tired. I think the Wolves, I know like people use this as an example for analysis they hate, or Adam Silver did, but like the Wolves were more motivated and more hungry. Like they came in with the knowledge that the Nuggets beat them last season, so they wanted to prove to everyone that they could do it. Ant was getting even better as a leader, as a vocal leader of the team, and his pull-up shooting was crazy good throughout the season and in certain games throughout the playoffs. He had hit and miss games against the Nuggets. Like obviously he went to 7 games, so we had games where he wasn't doing as good and his youth was showing. But having Jaden and Naz, I think, just proved that the depth for the Wolves really did help them. Like whether you think about matchups or the rock, paper, scissors idea, they just had more bodies to keep the starters fresh. Like even though Jokic was cooking Naz, they still had Cat to go in, and he played better than he did last season as far as being more disciplined, and he had less stupid fouls than normal, and he was hitting his three more consistently. I think last season, the first two games, he was not shooting the three at all well, but it kind of teetered off at the end of the Nuggets series, and then against the Mavs really fell off a cliff again. So I don't know whether they just burned all their jets on the Nuggets and then ran out of gas versus the Mavs, as well as the fact that the Mavs did have more rim protection that the Nuggets didn't have with Lively, and just being able to keep those bigs in the paint, whereas we don't have as many bigs. So there's interesting questions there with roster and specific personnel, but I just think like depth was a big reason why the Wolves were beating the Nuggets in this series. But we almost had it. It wasn't like they were like far and away better. Like we could have won this series. We were so close.
So Grace, how do you feel about the Timberwolves now that we've seen their whole path in this year's playoffs?
I'm shocked at the amount of cope that Will is exuding right now. The Timberwolves, to me, were the better team in the series. Like Will said, the depth made all the difference, not just because it gave them some versatility. So, for example, in game 1 and game 7, you had Nas making big plays, taking Cat's place when he gets in foul trouble late in the game, right? And we don't have a great option, especially against a team that big, if, say, Jokic were to get in foul trouble in the same position. I know AG at backup 5 is great. But also we lacked ball handler depth, and actually so do the Wolves. And that's one of the reasons that that we were able to sort of get better defensively against them as that series went on, despite our lack of rim protection, is that if we could just make life a lot harder on Ant, like make him a playmaker and kind of force other guys to make secondary plays, it's actually really tough for them. That team also falls apart with Mike Conley off the floor offensively too. So they have weak points. And I think that there were things that the Nuggets could have done earlier in that series to expose those weak points that they did later on, but it was too late. But I feel like they're a really good team. I just think they're really young and that their roster is overall pretty flawed in terms of being a great playoff team, in part because I don't think their offense has that much versatility. They're really good at what they do in terms of like the drive and kick and all that, but because of that lack of sort of secondary playmaking and relying so much on Mike Conley, it's why they're regular season not a great offense. They turn the ball over a lot. We saw some of the issues that they have even against us in the games that we won, right? But in terms of what makes Miroslav, you mentioned how you don't like the whole rock, paper, scissors thing with matchups. But I think matchups matter. The thing is that I actually think that the Nuggets, even this year, were about as close to matchup proof as you could be against the teams that exist in the NBA, except for the Timberwolves, right? Which is why I think it would have been their hardest series had they gone through it. It was their hardest series anyway, and they didn't get through it, right?
I would be totally fine with that if the Timberwolves were a better team. Here's the thing. My point is, I think Timberwolves are pretty lucky to get to the Western Conference Finals this season. I believe it was after Game 4 of that series that everybody was screaming, "Oh my God, the team that's gonna win this series is gonna win the championship. Look at these two teams go!" And we knew that the Nuggets sucked throughout the playoffs. They played really bad against the Lakers. It's just that Lakers really suck. Lakers are a really bad playoff team. So this is why Nuggets prevailed in 5 games. So I would really accept them not being matchup proof against the Timberwolves if they were a better team. But when I saw them being smacked by the Mavericks, it was all like, what are we doing? Like this team is so flawed on offense, and depend on brilliance of solo play from Anthony Edwards and like a crazy efficiency from Cat, and we know that doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, I mean that's what I. Oh, sorry, Grace.
Oh, no. I was just going to throw in there that if you notice on after timeouts, it's almost always a Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert pick and roll to try to calm their offense when things start to go off the rails. Like, that tells you how essential Conley is to keeping that team relatively coherent enough to survive on offense. And then defensively, they are quite versatile. But then they ran into Luka, which is like probably the worst possible single player matchup that they could have faced, because they don't have that sort of beefier forward type that as defensively versatile as that team is. And it was Luka next to another great on ball creator. And I actually think Kyrie was hit or miss in that series, but it was enough to carry things through. But I also think that the Wolves could have won that series. I didn't like their defensive game plan for the most part the entire time.
So let's jump on the Mavericks now. They were a 7th seed before the All-Star break, so not too far away from their position last season when they ended up 11th. They used the trade deadline to get guys like PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, rose to the 5 seed, and then won 3 consecutive series where they didn't have the home court advantage. They revealed just how flawed the Timberwolves team was, and that just made me angrier about the Nuggets postseason performance. I'm hitting this point too hard. I agree. So can we confidently say the Mavericks were a better postseason team than the Nuggets, or should we take the matchup thing here into really serious consideration? Like, would you expect
who are you asking?
the Nuggets to win against the Mavericks if they held on to that 20-point lead in Game 7? Whoever wants to start.
I feel like Jokic would have really stuck it to Lively or Gafford or whoever it was. I just don't think they have the defensive personnel, and he could have had a much easier time in that series, which it was kind of like Luka. Like, Luka had a much easier time versus the Wolves and was able to get through that series pretty easily by their standards. And I think it would have been easier for the Nuggets with Jamal's health. Obviously, it's hard to say because, like, if he's the leading shot attempt and creator on the team and he's shooting that badly, I don't know that we get through. But it's definitely an easier defensive scheme for us where, like, AG could hold up. He's strong to, like, hold up against Luka because Luka was just way stronger than anyone on the Wolves. Like, we know the Wolves as being this long athletic team, and Luka just had the strength to overcome that and not be bothered by the Wolves. But I think the Nuggets, they have some of that strength, and even Jokic in the post can be strong. But yeah, it's just hard to say, like, with the injuries, and we just have less players to solve problems, especially without Bruce. So it's like, would we have just shut down after that and just mentally checked out and been too tired? I don't know, but I do think we have a better chance to beat the Mavs than the Wolves on some degree, like on paper.
So I actually think, yeah, I agree. I don't really have questions about it, frankly. The fact that we got so close in the Wolves series just kind of makes me feel like we definitely would have beaten the Mavs and the Celtics, because like you said, we have fewer ways to solve problems that are presented, but the problems that those two teams present, we absolutely have the solution for, and it's like spamming Jokic, because neither of them has anything that could possibly make him less efficient for 4 games. I actually predicted a Nuggets win against the Mavs in the Western Conference Finals, thinking that Jamal would have a really bad series against the Mavericks, actually. So I think it just would have been a lot easier for MPJ, for AG, and Jokic to just kind of dominate in a series like that on both ends of the floor. For AG, I think that it would have been a tougher defensive series for Jokic, potentially, depending on what looks the Mavs kind of went with. But we saw throughout the playoffs that when it comes to Dallas in this new iteration, their strength is defense. And I actually think it's the same thing for the Boston Celtics, where if you find a way to break their defense, you're probably going to win that game because their defense is the most elite unit on both of those teams. Dallas really struggled offensively. Part of it is because they have this more defensively skewed personnel. They don't have as good of shooters. And Tim Hardaway Jr. is like unplayable in the playoffs right now. And was throughout most of their entire playoff run, right? Which I think just makes your job easier on defense. But it also means if you break their defense, the thing that gives them any edge, then you're going to win that. And I just think we had the tools to do that against both Dallas and Boston.
Yet the reason
they're too tiny.
I think the Nuggets, the Mavericks had an edge over the Nuggets in this postseason run is the fact that Luka doesn't need a Jamal to play incredible. Like, yes, Joker had a lot of trouble, solving the twin tower lineups from the Timberwolves. But if Jamal was great in that matchup, they could not play the same kind of defense as they did against the Nuggets. And on the other hand, Luka is a guy that doesn't need to pass the ball at all. Like, he's a great ball handler. He's like a LeBron-sized point guard, elite ball handler, which Joker is not. He's a center. He's a really great polyvalent player of all kinds, but he's not an elite ball handler. So I don't think Luka's orchestra around him is much better than what Joker had around him on the Nuggets. It's just the fact that he could assert himself so much more. And yes, he had some superstar performances from Kyrie Irving, but Kyrie can turn into the pumpkin as well. Like, he's not elite in every game. So I think it was just that. It was the fact that Luka just didn't have to wait for his running mate to be elite in order for him to be set up perfectly.
Yeah, I think just the fact of Luka's perimeter shot creation, makes that difference this year in particular, because Jokic's jump shot was so gnarly, let's say. But beyond that, I will say that Luka was really not great for the first two rounds, and part of that is because he relies so much on this tough shot making, and he did face some matchups that were able to at least reduce his efficiency on shots that are already not the easiest shots anyway. So I think that things kind of balance out in terms of just that scoring ability between the two. But it's also why I disagree that he doesn't need a co-star to kind of run alongside him, because Kyrie was actually decent, especially in that Clippers series against OKC. I really think Luka and Kyrie were both pretty terrible until like the last game of that series. And again, it was the defense of the team, which I think Kyrie was great defensively up until the finals. Really, every round he was making great plays, just being really solid. And then everyone was, rotating around them. And then in the games that the Mavericks won, Luka was incredibly solid on defense as well, and also making spectacular plays. Well, and I talked about, this great clutch time possession where he kind of stunts it Conley and then breaks up a lob attempt to Rudy. When he's really engaged on defense, you see what that team defense can look like, and we saw it in this game 4 against Boston yesterday as well. But I do think that the Celtics series in particular shows why you do need someone else to come along with you, because Luka can have these efficient nights and have it not translate to efficient team offense either.
Yeah, Luka will have a boneheaded possession here and there in every game. I agree with
Shot
that.
selection still somehow better than Jason Tatum's, though. But we won't get into
Well,
that unless we will. I'm happy.
that's a pretty low bar to cross. Come on. Okay, let's take the last short break, and then we will talk a bit about Jason Tatum. Don't go anywhere. We are back. So, last but not least, the Boston Celtics. I don't remember the last 60-win team that was as much doubted as this team. Even that Gobert-led Utah one-seed team was on pace for 59 wins. Many people, including me, expected them to crumble under pressure because of some bad clutch moments and dumb contested fadeaway shots throughout the season. Yes, they had some pretty incredible injury luck with the main guys from all the other opponents, or all of their opponents in these playoffs, but you play against who is in front of you, and they excelled at it. Boston is a pretty homegrown team like Denver. I believe Derek White was their Aaron Gordon move, but they didn't stop at that. After another disappointing playoff run last season, they shuffled the deck and traded several of their guys to get better. They replaced Marcus Smart, Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, Grant Williams, and got Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. Sure, their depth was depleted, but their top six got a lot better, and they did integrate their other guys during the season. So Joe Mazzulla could play guys like Pritchard and Hauser, and even my favorite third-string center in NBA 2K, Luke Cornett. Would you like for the Nuggets to be as brave as the Celtics were when they traded away some of their important guys to become better? And is that even an option when your second and third options obviously don't play in line with their contracts in the postseason, and your seventh and eighth guys don't even have a trade value since they are not counted on in playoffs? Let's start with Will.
I think it's harder to be as like risky. I think the KP move was definitely a good one. He didn't even play. He played 2 games this postseason or whatever, 3 games. I guess they didn't even really need him, but it really helped him in the regular season. They were huge front runners. So it was like, that's very good insight by Brad Stevens, I guess, and it worked out. They had that big floor spacing big who shoots it well. He defends somewhat well in the post and scores decently well in the post, though he was doing it pretty good against the Mavs. I think adding Drew Holiday is like a no-brainer. So, if we had something like that, I mean, we have KCP, but I'm trying to think of like a similar like no-brainer move. I guess like when we did trade for KCP and Bruce Brown and we traded Monte and Barton, it was like, maybe some Nuggets fans were sad about that, but it was very obvious we needed that. And I think it was similar with the Celtics. Although I will say the Jays are playing better than I expected. Like they're not having those boneheaded type of moves.
Not both
that we like. Yeah, well, I'm talking about the whole season. In this finals, like, yeah, Jason Tatum's not as good, but Jaylen Brown's doing much better. But yeah, they're just a very complete roster. They're playing so well, and they have an insane game plan, and the way that they executed it was way better than I expected, because I thought similarly they'd kind of melt down, something along those lines. But yeah, just the scheme they came up with and just putting Tatum on Lively and just taking away roll threats from Luka is just completely stalled them out, and they're so outmatched. I don't even care about the game last night. Like the Celtics are going to be fine. But I don't know.
We would never allow that, by the way.
Yeah, I think like if something is as obvious as what the Celtics had, where the writing was on the wall with Marcus Smart and letting Derek White come in, like it's not as obvious with, Christian Brown, for example. He's not this like Derek White player where we're ready to move on from KCP and just put him in. I think we know that there's still some time needed there. So they were just in a different position down the line with some players that were in the right positions to step in that allowed some flexibility for the roster. The Nuggets, it's about operating more around the margins and, adjusting the starters like the Celtics did, and then dominating the season.
Grace, I wanted to ask you about Pritchard and Hauser. I realized they are more experienced than, let's say, P. Watt and I don't know who would the other guy would be, like, outside of Christian and Reggie Jackson to compare to. Those two guys are more experienced than our guys off the bench that couldn't get into the playoff rotation, unlike Richard and Hauser. Is it just the chance they got, or is it the experience they had? I mean, how Richard is like a fifth season player, and Hauser is the third season player. What's the reason they could have relied on more guys than the Nuggets in the playoffs?
So Will and I did this draft of bench players in the playoffs, and someone pointed out that most of my list was a lot of players from the Eastern Conference. I didn't have Peyton Pritchard on there, but I had like a Deuce McBride and TJ McConnell, etc. By the way, would love to have TJ McConnell on this team. He'd be a great Nugget. But I do think that one of the reasons that Peyton Pritchard in particular, but I think Sam Hauser as well, are playable in the playoffs is because of the competition that they faced. It's only been for small stretches of this series that even Hauser gets played off of the floor. And part of that involves just like Kyrie and Luka being able to exploit their limitations defensively, right? They have a very different bench sort of not just construction, but like the players that are coming off of the bench for the Celtics have a different floor than ours do, where they can contribute on offense for the most part. Our bench players are largely limited in their offensive skill right now, whether it's because they're more defensively skewed or because they're too young. I think that probably we would have seen a lot more Peyton in both the Western Conference Finals and Finals than we did in round 2, which was almost no minutes against the Timberwolves, in part because of the makeup of that series, where it required, at least in Malone's eyes, and I can follow that logic, the team play a more coherent offense than anything, because it was affecting their ability to defend on the other side. And so there were decisions that had to get made. And part of that kind of plays into my general philosophy of offense is more important than defense. But sometimes you'll have an offensively skewed player that their defense is a detriment in the playoffs and their offense doesn't translate, whether it's because their shot release is too slow or the pressure of the moment, whatever it is. And so they're giving you nothing, and so they can't play. So that's always a concern. But if you have a skilled offensive player that can kind of play team defense, and even sometimes they're going to get scored on, but playoff teams and good playoff players are going to be able to make tough shots on anybody anyway. So maybe you want that offensive kick there. So there's this push and pull. So that's the offense defense argument. You talk about the experience, and yeah, they have more years, but they also have a lot more playing time. And I think that one of the things I talked about earlier with having a more veteran scaffold to the bench playing at a key position, whether it's point guard or center, can also be achieved by having more staggered lineups in the regular season. We talked about this Boston starting lineup, and we're always talking about how expensive the Nuggets starting lineup is, but the Celtics have 4 players that are currently making over $30 million a year. And Jaylen Brown was just in his first year of his Supermax deal. Jason Tatum is probably going to sign that contract this offseason. And what they do is say, like, wow, we have all this value that's in our starting lineup. We should probably spread it around in these different lineups. And they kind of have to in the regular season, and of course in the playoffs as rotations shorten. So I would actually like to see a lot more of that from us, because we do have expensive players, and we should figure out more versatile ways to use them outside of playing with Jokic. So when we talk about the starter versus benchman, it's just Jokic on, Jokic off the floor. And I actually think that our players, although they play really well with Jokic, I don't think it's impossible to figure out other ways to, even if you're not maximizing them, they are versatile in what they can do. They are very athletic. We have MPJ and KCP who are great shooters. And I think that it would benefit our young bench guys to be able to play alongside some of the starters, because you have a situation in Boston where, say, okay, Tatum's off the floor. He's their best player despite all of my online slander. Okay, Tatum's off the floor, but then you can run Jaylen Brown, Kristaps Porzingis pick and roll, which is one of the best actions that the Celtics ran this entire year. You can run Derek White and Kristaps Porzingis pick and roll, or Derek White and Luke Cornett, and it helps for one of those players to be a really good ball handler, which is why I don't think that Malone will or ever really should have completely abandoned like the Jamal stagger, but I just think he needs somebody else there to help bring some like go-to actions there, just so that the young guys have something to play off of. Right now, there's not a good enough like hierarchy of what is supposed to be done on a given like half court possession, and I think that's so important. Even if they're missing shots, if you run your offense the right way, then you can get back and set your defense. Too often we see these sort of snowball sequences with the bench where everything just goes awry because nobody really knows what they're doing, particularly on offense. And part of that is like Jamal needs to be a better point guard for that second unit. But the other part is we could be pairing like higher level guys from the rest of our starting unit with him and with those other young guys so that they can try to play a more coherent brand of basketball than they have up until this point.
Yeah, I would just handcuff Jamal to Joker next season. Like let him look much better.
Get a backup point guard. I'm fine with that too.
Get a backup point guard, and that guy can play with Aaron Gordon. He can play with Michael Porter. He can play hopefully with KCP. By the way, what's your gut feeling about KCP returning to the team? Because the Nuggets are completely stealth front office. There's no leaks whatsoever. So what would be your gut feeling about KCP returning? You know, considering the consequences of the second apron that goes.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the big question: is how does Calvin feel about the second apron? Because I know they've communicated they want to maximize Jokic in this championship window. If they think the second apron is going to be too restrictive on maximizing this window, and they see a path forward for a replacement, then I could see them, letting KCP go and trying to get some lesser players around and build the depth. But I just don't think you can lose KCP and still be considered a better team. And it's just making it harder on yourselves for next season. So maybe I feel like he's going to stay. That's my gut feeling, just because I feel like he has a good relationship with Denver. There's so much that goes into this. It's not just like team stuff. It's he's used to living here. He has a family, all that jazz. He likes Denver, but money is money. So if he's getting huge offers and he's going to take it, then good for him. But I just feel like the Nuggets know that we can't lose him. So I feel like they'll just match it. And it's honestly easier just to keep KCP and keep everyone happy than like coming up with all these extra solutions. Then you have to trade and get the right guy. It's more straightforward to keep the starting five and work around the margins, sign some vet point guard or something like that, than lose KCP. And then who knows from there.
Grace?
I don't know if KCP is going to stay, but I see a very clear path to him staying regardless of what other teams realistically offer him, just because like we saw with Bruce last year, and where it's a different situation with KCP because we have his bird rights. Bruce, like we literally just were not going to be able to match what another team offered. But I see other teams are going to throw a big number at him, and probably 2 years. I could see like maybe one team like San Antonio could maybe offer 3 to pull him away at a higher number than we were able to match. But to me, it feels like the front office should just give him a solid number and like one more year than anybody else is able to offer him, because other teams don't know yet what his fit's going to be. So they wouldn't have the same level of commitment to him. To me, it just makes sense to give one more year than anyone else willing to offer. And then it's up to KCP, but I think he would want to stay. So if they don't keep him, I'm going to put that squarely on the front office, unless it comes out that they were willing to offer like 20 million, 3 years with a player option or whatever. Because I think that's as high as they should go, second apron or not. If only because you see a team like the Celtics in a situation where they're like, we gotta just keep extending guys so we can preserve these assets, even if you think, KCP's getting a little bit older, this and that, whatever. He's a valuable player to and desirable to a lot of teams now, and he's still going to be desirable because he's like the perfect 3-and-D player. I think he had an all defense caliber season this year, and what he provides on both ends of the floor are incredibly sought after: point of attack defense and 3-point shooting. So even if it's just to preserve the asset, you need to keep him. I have seen people put out proposals for ways that they could try to not replace KCP, but try to fill that gap that's going to be left if he does leave, both in the starting lineup. But I just think it's too important to just keep. He's such a big like minutes eater, if nothing else, and a guy that you trust at that position, with Jokic on the floor or not. Actually, his lineups tend to be positive regardless, although he's the one starter that tends to be the most handcuffed to Jokic, so we don't have a huge sample size. So I feel really strongly that they should do it, and I see the path to doing that realistically, even if you have other teams trying to drive it up to like, I don't know, 27, 30 million a year. I wouldn't go that high, but I'd offer less money and more years. I feel very strongly about this, as you can see. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
Excellent. Okay, let's now get crazy for a couple of minutes for the end of the show, just to end on a high note. I've prepared a silly little game for you guys, and it had a long explanation because I'm not sure it's going to be clear to everybody listening to the show. So, 12 Nuggets players have appeared in at least 30 regular season games this season. Try to guess who had the biggest percentage of 3-point field goals attempted among all the field goals he took this season. So, for instance, if somebody took 70 3-point field goals attempts and 100 total field goal attempts, that would be 70% of his field goal attempts. If you guess the number one guy on this list, you'll get 12 points, 11 for the second on the list, and so on. So we're only considering the 12 guys that have appeared in at least 30 regular season games this season. Since we are doing the alphabetical order, Grace, you will have the first try. Who had the highest?
Can you tell us the 3 rostered players that did not appear in 30 regular season games?
Yes. So it's Jalen Pickett, it's Hunter Tyson, and it's Vlatko Čančar.
Okay. I'm gonna go with Justin Holiday.
Justin Holiday is just the perfect and the correct answer for number one. 70.1% of all of his field goals are for 3 points.
Nice.
Will.
Oh God, you took my answer. I mean, I'm like want to go for some dark horse and say like P Watt, because like all he did was just like he did a lot of spot ups. Was he pretty high?
Is that your answer?
Sure.
P Watt is number 7 on this list with 34% of all of his field goals, and that's good for 6 points. Grace, back to you.
This is the percentage of their. Okay, gotcha. So I'm gonna go with MPJ.
MPJ is on the list, and surprisingly enough, he's 4th on this list. So this is 9 points for Grace. He only
a lot of long twos.
51% of his field goals were threes. Will, back to you.
Okay, I'll just go with KCP.
KCP is number 3 on this list. This is 10 points for you. 52.5% of his field goals were threes.
Wow.
Grace.
Christian
is, let me see, 8 on this list. So that's 5 points. For you, Christian, only 34%. Actually, he's tied with Peyton Watson. And now that I see that, you will get 6 points as well because Will got 6 for Peyton.
All right. Man. I mean, I feel like Jamal took a lot of mid-range shots, but he did shoot a lot of threes. I guess I'll just go with Jamal just to get hopefully something.
Jamal is 6th on this list with 34.6. That's pretty low. 34.6% of his field goal attempts. That's good for 7 points. Grace.
Julian.
Julian is number 2.
Dang.
Julian is number 2.
Yeah.
11 points for you. 62.2%. Still far away from Justin Holiday's 70%. But yeah, he's actually
Those
pretty
dudes know how to let it
comfortably
fly.
yeah, they're not afraid. Will.
Reggie
Jackson is number 5 on this list, so that's 8 points for you. Reggie, 37, almost 38% of his field goal attempts. Grace.
AG.
AG is 9th on this list. That's 4 points for you. AG, only 19%, or God, thank you, only 19% of his field goal attempts were threes. Will, back to you.
I feel like, so that's all the starters. I mean, is Jokic the only one left? Like, we haven't guessed Jokic.
You did not.
But he's so low. I feel like he's going to be 12. Oh, man. Who is left? I'm missing someone.
You did end up guessing Jamal then?
Yeah, I guess Jamal. Yeah. Who's left on? There's someone on the bench that I'm like not realizing. I'll just say Jokic. I don't know.
Jokic is number 10 on this list. 3 points for you. 16% of his field goals were threes. We only need 2 more guys. So I'm gonna you've guessed all of the top 10. So should I tell you the last 2 guys? It's 3 points, really, if you know who the last 2 guys are. Both of these guys
I know who they are, but
okay. Not helping them.
All right, I'm gonna go with. Wait, I didn't say Zeke already, did I?
No.
Okay, Zeke.
Zeke is number 11 on the list. 15%.
Is DJ 12 then?
DJ is 12. 1 point for you for that. Yeah, DJ actually did not attempt a single 3-point field goal, which means he is still 100% from 3-point line in his Nuggets career, which is pretty awesome, guys.
He's preserving that. He's never going to take another one.
So, do you want to know who won?
I feel like Grace, she got 1 and 2.
You got a lot of the middle ones, though.
So Grace has 21, 27, 38, 44 points, and Will has 23, 31, 35 points. Yeah, Grace won this.
Julian Strother, that was key.
Yes, well, Strother and Justin Holiday, those two are crazy high on these lists. None of the other guys are
my boys.
To
I actually wouldn't mind having Justin back next year, depending on the other moves that the team makes. But yeah, the fireman, he tried to carry us through that Wolves series, but we wasted his great games early. So
yeah, game 1 was amazing from him. Yeah. That's true.
So he only had the one. It was actually like game 2, and then he was good until game 5, actually, and then it was like not good.
Yeah, that's true. But what more can you ask from a minimum veteran guy? I'm really happy with what we got from Justin this season. So, guys, do you know when your next episode is coming out?
We're recording something middle of next week, so look out for our hopefully we get to just do the Nuggets offseason preview and not have to talk too much about the finals. But our Nuggets offseason preview with a special guest is coming next week, and we'll also have guests on to talk about the draft and free agency and possibly summer league, but those talks are still in the works.
I cannot recommend your show more to my audience. Like, it's the same like what you had today, just without my annoying questions. So just go check it out.
No, that was great. We
this
need
is
more of
good.
your
I need the
questions.
structure. No, Will knows I need the structure.
Yeah, it helps the run length. You think we had structure, but we still went 21 minutes over the time limit. So yeah, it is what it is. It is what it is. I'm not trying to cut these great shows shorter. Okay, so that's all we prepared for today, and please take the word prepared loosely. We be well, be safe, be kind to everybody, call your mom, and until next week, Mason Plumlee.